Thank you so much for this absolutely warm introduction. I'm super excited and I'm terrified. So I will read mostly, and I'm grateful to be here with this amazing bunch of people and with you, and I hope to know you better over the coming hours and days. It is my first time to Bucharest and to this conference, obviously, and I love it, and it feels like home. It's like Kyiv, but in Romania. And when Christian invited me to take part in this year's conference, and he said that the topic was hope, I was like, what? Me and hope? It's not really compatible things. I am A, depressed, B, I'm a journalist, C, I'm a philosopher by training, it doesn't help, D, I'm from Ukraine. No hope for me. Thanks. As Alina mentioned, I am based in Kyiv, but also I'm based in Lviv. So I'm basically spending most of my time on trains, commuting. It's 512 kilometers between these two cities. And 5 years ago, I was a burned out cultural journalist. In the previous year, I quit my job after 9 years of work in an online newspaper, or I am calling this a coal mine. And 6 of them, I was working as an editor of a culture section, which we revived, which was no culture section when I started, but we revived it in 2015 after the Revolution of Dignity, after the Maidan protests. So I was burned out. I quit in 2021. And I decided to take my writing challenges to a new level. So I decided to write a book. I went to Kharkiv, which is 40 kilometers to the Russian border, for a writing residency in an apartment of a prominent Ukrainian intellectual and essayist of the 20th century, Yuri Shivilov. It was February 2022. On the first day of a full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, I was still in Kharkiv at that writing residency. And I was doing what all normal people do at writing residency: drinking wine, procrastinating, and whining about my writer's block. On 23rd of February, I spent an evening with my friend. We drank wine and we discussed our loves, our burnouts, culture, and also we were pretty much sure that there will be no big war. I came back to this apartment at 3 a.m. on 24th of February, which resulted in me oversleeping all the explosions and alerts that marked the beginning of the invasion, as well as over 40 phone calls for my friends and family. When I finally called my parents around 9 a.m., when they were in Kyiv, I heard, "Thank God you're alive." Then I bought the last ticket to the 13:05 intercity train to Kyiv, first class. I ate in oatmeal. I left most of my fancy stuff, my favorite cashmere sweater, nice cosmetics, books, and favorite pajamas behind in Kharkiv, and headed to the train station. It was not too crowded in the first day of the war. It smelled of gunpowder all over the city, but people weren't panicking. As we were waiting for our trains, we were helping each other. To put a clumsy, overweight French bulldog in a carrier, to hold a cage with a huge white parrot to the train, and to figure out what that tank that we saw crossing over a bridge was. It was Ukrainian. The train I decided to take arrived at the station 3 hours late. Or as in Deutsche Bahn, it was on time. By the end of the day, I was delivered home to Kyiv around midnight. Way after the curfew, though. The first curfew of 1486. Thus ended the 24th of February of 2022, or as I call it, one of the worst hangovers in my life. The next morning, I left for Lviv to the west with my then partner, our dog, my friend, and her 5-year-old son, and a bunch of weird things that we packed into the car, thinking we would come back in a week or so. I tried to remember what these things were, but I failed. My mind keeps the gain memory without much details. My parents stayed in Kyiv. They decided not to leave. The road that usually takes 7 hours or 8 by driving took 48 hours, with an overnight stay in the middle of our trip. The road was one constant traffic jam. From the car window, I saw people building checkpoints out of sandbags and a beautiful, almost surreal sunset at the end of the second day of our trip. In Lviv, I found myself among the culture makers who crowded this city for the first days and weeks of a full-scale Russian invasion. Lviv was literally buzzing with anxiety, anger, and adrenaline. One of my friends, an auction house owner, was figuring out how to make anti-tank obstacles from the old rails. Another friend, who is an ex-deputy minister of culture, was buying bulletproof vests. A research center whose main focus is urban history made a shelter for refugees out of their conference room. Museum professionals were helping their colleagues in the east and south of the country to evacuate. Filmmakers and journalists were turning into local producers for international media teams. In other words, everyone was busy. I felt lost, however. I couldn't find myself anywhere among these wartime reinventions. As I already mentioned, I'm a journalist, a culture one, aka the most useless one, a film critic and curator, an editor, and overall a person who asks annoying questions about meanings of things. This is the most inappropriate set of skills during the apocalypse. My writer block was gone though. I was high on adrenaline and I wrote a couple of opinion pieces where I was wondering what the connection between culture and war was. I was bitter about culture and I was sure that art can bring any closure. I was disappointed in how most of cultural institutions internationally responded to the aggression of Russia. So I was wondering, I couldn't help but wonder, how come cultural institutions, festivals, conferences, museums, have been turning a blind eye to the aggressive country waging a war in the middle of Europe and elsewhere. Back then, for me, culture and art were tied together with human rights violations, devastation, and decades of warmongering. Culture stopped being inspiring for me. It became toxic. I was stunned by the arrogance of culture makers and artists. I was bitter. I reacted to the horrors of the war against my country. It was a cortisol-induced cultural criticism. Once I realized the reasons why I was writing it is stress and anger, I stopped writing again. Cultural criticism and thinking need distance, calmness, well-adjusted breathing, good sleep, and above all, the feeling of safety. We did not have that in 2022. We still don't. But many things have changed. Our lives will never be the same after that February. For 4 years, we've been experiencing a multi-layered grief. For a while, we've been mourning for our lives, for who we were before 2022, delusional and hopeful. My generation, millennials, who in luckier countries are on TikTok, joking about their various hobbies as a coping mechanism for the Middle Age crisis, is dying in this war. Sometimes we can attend a funeral and a wedding in the same day. We hold dancing parties and raves to commemorate and honor our friends, to honor the courage of them, the courage of our friends who were killed in action, protecting us, while we were writing articles, taking trains to international conferences, asking questions, and demanding answers. 2022 was a year full of adrenaline and cortisol. Have you seen Marty Supreme? Multiply that by 1 million. It felt like you were drinking coffee, were punched in the face, and were running 1,000 sprints at the same time. 2023 was a year of losing hope. A big Ukrainian counteroffensive being watched elsewhere as a reality TV show failed. There seemed to be no good news in 2023, and we were slowly sliding down into the abyss of understanding that this war was not going to end soon. It was going to last for a while, maybe even for our whole lives, which can end next week. In 2024, our jokes, dark as a coal, became completely untranslatable to our foreign friends and colleagues. In 2025, everyone claimed to have completely adapted and learned to distinguish the types of Russian and Iranian drones flying in the neighborhoods by ear. By 2026, many of my friends had started taking prescription anti-anxiety and antidepressant medication, me included. What is hope, anyway? Cambridge Dictionary has a bit of passive-aggressive definition, and I like it. It is definition, the one that like my mom would provide, and I like it because it is definition of a hope as a verb. To hope is to want something to happen or to be true, and usually have a good reason to think that it might. Keeping that in mind, somewhere in between the end of the world and coming to Bucharest, I started brewing a journal. And I came back to a professional identity as an editor, which I loved, but found it difficult to combine with my writer's ambitions. It was in the good company of friends, Sofia Diak, a historian and the director of the Center for Urban History in Lviv, which I mentioned before, and Nathalie Nougairet, a French journalist and editor. We started asking ourselves, how do we grieve and heal if the process of mourning seems endless? Is there such thing as closure? Is there a sense in seeing the future? What is at stake? Was there ever an after-war? After all that happened, will we ever get a proper rest? How does water run during the war? Are archives reliable? It seemed that while the whole world was crumbling around us, the words crystallized their meaning. All of a sudden, poetry started to make more sense than any other form of written word. It seemed that words, terms, concepts, pronounced and written, needed the most clarity possible. I allow myself to quote Ukrainian poet Kyiv, who wrote an essay for us last year for the issue about the future. I will cut it down. In wartime, a person is a verb. In wartime, everything is a verb. Hope is a verb too. So that's how and why we came up with revisions, a culture of journal and a journal of culture, a journal of culture and ideas. While I was pitching some topics to my friends, I was asking them also some weird questions. It's the best thing I can do. We're preparing an issue on grief and healing. Will you write about your garden? I asked my friend, and she did. Are you a war reporter? Tell us how you swam in Afghanistan. You said that neighborhood is an empty concept. Could you elaborate on that? All of those questions resulted in absolutely beautiful essays we were lucky to publish since May 2025 when we launched. And we were happy to be joined by an absolutely amazing group of people as writers and authors and interviewees and readers and advisory board and friends who are supporting us. And we are super small and slow. As we are preparing our 10th issue, which is due in April, I'm thinking about the intellectual privilege to make a journal in wartime. It's a journal that tries to be not only about the war, but of course it is about it, inherently and unavoidably. Asking questions in wartime is challenging. When the war is in your country and you are the one who defends yourself, it makes you overprotective of your boundaries, of your roots, of the pantheons of heroes, of stories and narratives, naturally, as they are being violated in the most brutal form. Any doubt, hello, even in its most tender form, can be perceived as an act of destruction. The fragile structures of our lives are shaken and require precision and care. So how to have a decent conversation about the architecture of our thinking and thus living in such circumstances? In revisions, we came up with several internal rules that may be useful for everyone. We have to slow down. We're stepping back a little bit. We're zooming out and we're taking time. We're a slow journal. No exclamation points. We do not shout at people. Gentle design and beautiful illustrations. Yes, we're going to talk about death and gardening, about the shattering of democracy, about non-linear time flow, but we will do it calmly. We will try to be overly attentive to words and syntax. This is why we're here in the first place. Ukraine and Europe? No. Ukraine, Europe. Eastern European? Just European. Enough with this division. It doesn't help. We are carefully revising and rethinking our own vocabularies with each issue. And we are bilingual, which also helps us to find the right words every time to translate our thoughts, not only from Ukrainian into English and vice versa, but also from one context to another, building the conversation together. all of it requires some high expectations from reality and a bit of delusion, of course. So after all, Christian, you and the team behind the Power of Storytelling 2026 were right. All we do is hope. Hope that you will ask the right question and someone will start looking in a new direction, leading us to the more just future. Hope that those tiny pieces we've put together in a jewelry box of a journal issue, a book, a podcast, a life, will inspire someone not to fall into despair. I hope that a decent conversation can heal and make the world a better place. So let's have those conversations. Thank you.